Imagine standing in a rice field, mud clinging to your boots, rain pelting your face, the air thick with the acrid stench of smoke and burning foliage. Somewhere in the distance, an American tank rumbles forward, flames flickering from its flamethrower nozzle, one of the terrifying machine's soldiers nicknamed the Zippo. Each roar of its engine sends a shiver down your spine. You know that in a few minutes, it could incinerate your position, obliterate your comrades, and leave nothing behind but charred earth. For the Japanese soldiers entrenched here, the stakes were horrifyingly simple: stop the tank or die trying. And in many cases, dying was the only option they had been taught to consider. This is not just a story of machines and tactics. It is a story of loyalty, ideology, desperation, and human courage pushed to its limits. These men had been indoctrinated from childhood to revere the emperor, uphold honor above all else, and view surrender as the ultimate disgrace. When confronted with the metallic terror of the Zippo tanks, engineered to crush bunkers, burn vegetation, and annihilate infantry, the soldiers faced a moral and physical crucible. To stand and fight meant almost certain death. To flee meant dishonor that could stain not just their name, but the honor of their family. Insert B-roll. Close-ups of Japanese soldiers' faces, mud-streaked and grim. Archival footage of Zippo tanks moving through jungles. Panoramic shots of smoke-filled battlefields. From Okinawa to Iwo Jima, the Zippo tank was more than just a weapon. It was a psychological force. Its flamethrower could clear bunkers in seconds, turning well-fortified positions into ovens. Japanese infantry, trained in close-quarter combat and guerrilla tactics, often had only a few minutes to react. They could deploy explosives, set traps, or attempt suicide charges, but all these measures carried immense risk. Diaries from Japanese soldiers reveal the inner turmoil. We knew the tanks were unstoppable. Our explosives might slow them for moments, but death awaited. Yet we ran forward, because to hesitate was dishonor, and to retreat was betrayal of our duty. Visuals. Archival images of soldiers with satchel charges, flamethrowers igniting defensive positions, trenches engulfed in smoke. The Americans understood the terror they inspired. Zippo tanks were designed for psychological as well as tactical dominance. Infantry could be pinned for hours, their morale shattered before the first shot even landed. But for the Japanese soldiers, surrender was never an option. These men had been drilled to value honor over life, taught that their sacrifice might delay the enemy long enough to save comrades elsewhere, or at least demonstrate loyalty to their emperor. Their acts, often seen by outsiders as suicidal, were in fact deeply calculated decisions shaped by culture, training, and ideology. Imagine a young soldier, barely 18, hiding in a foxhole as a flamethrower tank approaches. Flames lick the mud walls, smoke fills his lungs, and the heat is unbearable. He grips a satchel charge, knowing that in seconds he will run into the open, risking death to blow up the tank's treads. In his mind, there is no fear, only duty, honor, and the crushing weight of expectation. This was the reality faced by thousands of Japanese soldiers in the final years of the Pacific War. Insert B-roll. Slow-motion footage of soldiers crawling through mud, fire creeping toward defensive positions, close-ups of hands gripping explosives. What drove them to such extremes? Was it courage, indoctrination, desperation, or a mixture of all three? The answer is complex. Cultural values, military indoctrination, and sheer survival instinct intertwined to create a mindset where throwing one's life into the path of a metal monster was not madness, it was the ultimate expression of duty. Letters recovered from the field reveal haunting insights. If we survive, we serve. If we die, we serve. Retreat is shame. To hesitate is death. And yet, every day we wonder if the flames will reach us first. The Zippo tanks themselves were marvels of wartime engineering. Built on Sherman tank chassis, they could propel incendiary fuel with terrifying precision up to 150 feet, incinerating bunkers, brush, and any living thing in their path. Infantry tactics that had worked for decades suddenly became inadequate. Trenches, foxholes, and sandbagged positions offered little protection against streams of burning fuel that spread like wildfire across the battlefield. This technological leap created a new kind of battlefield psychology. Fear was as potent a weapon as bullets or artillery. Visuals. Archival footage of Zippo tanks firing, close-ups of flamethrowers igniting defensive positions, aerial views of scorched earth. Yet, despite the technological superiority, Japanese soldiers did not yield. They studied the tanks, observed their weaknesses, and devised desperate measures: satchel charges strapped to their bodies, hidden explosives under tank pads, tunnels dug to place mines. In many cases, soldiers would throw themselves into the path of the flames in a final, devastating attempt to halt the advance. These acts, often portrayed as suicidal in Western accounts, were in their minds tactical maneuvers intertwined with honor, a blend of military calculation and cultural imperative. In this chapter, we set the stage for the intense, brutal encounters to come. We introduce the main players, the soldiers, the tanks, the commanders who issued orders with the weight of the emperor's expectations, and the environment: treacherous jungles, mud-choked fields, and fortified villages under siege. To understand why Japanese soldiers threw themselves into the path of death against American Zippo tanks, we must first step back and examine the world in which they were raised, trained, and indoctrinated. The story begins long before the tanks arrived, a story rooted in ideology, military doctrine, and the culture of an empire that demanded absolute loyalty. Japan in the 1930s and early 1940s was a nation at war with itself and the world. The militarist government, facing increasing pressure to expand territory and secure resources, created a society where duty, honor, and sacrifice were not abstract virtues, they were life itself. Insert B-roll: Japanese school children marching, soldiers training, emperor's portraits, and military propaganda posters. From a young age, boys destined for military service were taught the inviolable supremacy of the emperor. They were instructed that life was secondary to duty, that surrender was the ultimate betrayal, and that personal fear was an enemy to be crushed. Military schools instilled this doctrine daily, with harsh drills, moral instruction, and ritualized punishment for any sign of weakness. By the time these young men were sent to the front, they were not merely soldiers, they were instruments of a cultural and ideological machine, molded to act without hesitation when faced with death. By 1944, the Pacific War had reached its desperate final chapters. Japanese forces had suffered devastating losses in battles from Guadalcanal to the Philippines. The industrial and logistical superiority of the United States meant that Japanese troops were increasingly outnumbered, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. The introduction of American flamethrower tanks, nicknamed Zippos by soldiers due to their fiery destruction, was yet another blow to already demoralized units. These tanks could clear entrenched positions, destroy bunkers, and spread terror through infantry formations. For Japanese commanders, the threat posed by these mechanized beasts required an almost suicidal response: stop the tanks at any cost, even if it meant death for the defenders. Visuals: archival footage of Zippo tanks in action, explosions in jungle terrain, soldiers digging bunkers. The Japanese response was shaped by decades of military doctrine. Infantry were trained in guerrilla tactics, hand-to-hand combat, and explosives. Young officers emphasized aggressive action, psychological intimidation, and moral coercion to maintain discipline. Soldiers were taught that death was not merely acceptable, it was honorable. Kamikaze pilots, banzai charges, and last-ditch defensive tactics were not anomalies. They were natural extensions of a belief system in which the soldier's life belonged to the emperor, and surrender was a stain that could never be erased. Insert B-roll: soldiers practicing bayonet drills, preparing explosives, ceremonial salutes. The geography of the Pacific Islands amplified the stakes. Dense jungles, rocky cliffs, and narrow beaches created natural choke points that Japanese defenders attempted to fortify. These defenses were painstakingly prepared. Camouflage bunkers, hidden tunnels, and booby traps were laid to maximize the killing potential against advancing infantry and, more importantly, tanks. Zippo tanks were specifically designed to counter such fortifications, but the Japanese soldiers' intimate knowledge of their terrain gave them a psychological edge, even in the face of overwhelming firepower. Visuals, slow pan of jungle tunnels, hidden pits, and camouflage bunkers, overhead maps showing tank routes and defensive positions. The psychology of these soldiers cannot be understated. Diaries, letters, and oral histories from Japanese veterans reveal the immense pressure they faced. If we falter, if we retreat, if we hesitate, we betray our families, our emperor, and our country. Yet every Zippo we faced could incinerate our bunkers, kill our friends, and destroy our world in minutes. And still, we ran forward. There was no choice but forward. Each Zippo tank was a symbol not only of the enemy's technological superiority, but of the impossible choice imposed on them: die for honor or live with shame. Insert B-roll. Close-ups of soldiers' faces, mud and blood-streaked uniforms, hands clutching explosives. Commanders on both sides understood the implications. American reports described the almost suicidal bravery of Japanese defenders, men hurling satchel charges at moving tanks, soldiers leaping onto armored vehicles, and coordinated charges designed to delay or damage mechanized advances. These were not reckless acts, they were deeply embedded in military culture and ideology. American soldiers often described these encounters as terrifying and surreal. One tank operator recalled, "We'd see men charging toward us, knowing full well the tank would crush them. It was like they weren't afraid of death at all. Sometimes it felt like they were ghosts, determined to haunt our advance." The desperate nature of the Pacific Campaign further fueled these tactics. As resources dwindled, Japanese soldiers had fewer options for conventional warfare. Ammunition, food, and medical supplies were scarce. Yet the Zippo tanks represented an existential threat that could not be ignored. A single tank could clear multiple defensive positions in minutes, annihilating trenches, bunkers, and hidden soldiers. Every defensive line became a battlefield of psychological endurance as much as firepower. Soldiers were forced to make split-second decisions that would decide life or death, not only for themselves, but for their comrades. Visuals: flamethrowers shooting through trees, destroyed bunkers, soldiers lying prone in mud under fire. By 1944-45, Japanese soldiers were caught between two irreconcilable realities: the ideological imperative to die with honor and the terrifying reality of American technological dominance. The Zippo tank was both a weapon and a symbol, a literal representation of the unstoppable force of the Allies. For Japanese troops, the arrival of these machines on the battlefield demanded an extreme response. They could not retreat, they could not surrender, and they could not fail. This created a deadly cycle where human bravery and ideology collided with modern mechanized warfare, producing scenes of horror, heroism, and extraordinary human endurance. Insert B-roll. Soldiers preparing satchel charges, tunnels rigged with explosives, American tanks advancing through jungles, explosions lighting the night sky. In the next chapter, we will explore the core drama of these encounters, the human stories of those who ran toward flames, the tactical maneuvers employed to slow unstoppable tanks, and the horrifying consequences for men who believed that death in battle was preferable to dishonor. These stories reveal the extraordinary interplay of courage, ideology, and technology, a crucible where the human spirit was tested beyond imagination. The first clash was like a scene ripped from a nightmare. Zippo tanks rumbled through the jungle, their flamethrowers spitting fire like dragons unleashed. The Japanese soldiers, dug into camouflage bunkers and hidden foxholes, could hear the roar of engines before seeing the tanks emerge. Each man knew his fate the moment he gripped his satchel charge, adjusting explosives under the creeping vines, mud, and debris. For these men, the battlefield was both a stage of heroism and a theater of horror, where death waited in every shadow. Insert B-roll. Close-up of mud-caked hands gripping explosives, soldiers peering out from camouflage positions, Zippo tanks advancing. As the tanks advanced, the first human stories emerged: brave, desperate, and tragic. One platoon, entrenched on a ridge overlooking a narrow valley, had prepared a deadly ambush. Explosives were buried under the jungle floor, tripwires strung across paths, and men lay in wait, every muscle taut with anticipation. The first Zippo emerged, its flamethrower hissing, smoke billowing from the barrel. One soldier, barely 20 years old, sprinted from cover, hurling a satchel charge directly under the tank's tracks. The explosion rocked the jungle, flames consuming both foliage and the soldier's body. Yet the tank pressed on, seemingly invincible. Visuals: slow motion of an explosion, fire-consuming trees, tank treads rolling over debris, soldiers' silhouette against flames. This pattern repeated across the Pacific Islands. Small groups of Japanese soldiers would confront tanks head-on, using explosives, grenades, and sheer daring. They threw themselves in front of moving vehicles, latching onto tracks in attempts to disable engines. Entire defensive positions became sacrificial arenas, where the soldiers' understanding of honor dictated that death was preferable to surrender. Insert B-roll. Archival footage of Japanese soldiers preparing for tank assaults, camouflaged foxholes. Zippo tanks firing. In the villages of Okinawa, civilians witnessed acts that blurred the line between strategy and fanaticism. One report describes a soldier running into the open, holding a bundle of explosives to meet the advancing tank. Another soldier detonated a mine beneath a tank while knowing he would be engulfed by flames. The villagers, hiding in huts, could only watch, their faces pale with fear. For the Japanese soldiers, the outcome mattered less than the principle: stop the tank, delay the enemy, honor the emperor, no matter the cost. The Americans, initially stunned by the intensity of these human assaults, adapted quickly. Tank commanders learned to move in pairs, providing mutual cover against infantry charges. Flamethrower operators adjusted trajectories to maximize defensive suppression. Yet, despite these tactical adjustments, the human will of the Japanese soldiers remained an unpredictable and terrifying factor. Zippo tanks could destroy bunkers, but they could not crush the morale of men willing to die with honor. Visuals: tank crews coordinating, flamethrowers firing into dense jungle, explosions revealing hidden foxholes. One of the most infamous engagements occurred in a narrow jungle pass, where a small company of Japanese soldiers had rigged explosives along the route. As the first tank approached, men leapt from concealed positions, throwing charges and attempting to disable the treads. Flames erupted, trees ignited, and the air filled with smoke and the screams of the dying. Yet the tank pressed forward, crushing obstacles with relentless force. In the chaos, one soldier clung to the vehicle, detonating his charge and blowing both himself and part of the tank's undercarriage. Miraculously, the crew survived, though shaken. This confrontation became emblematic of the terrifying combination of bravery, desperation, and ideology that define these battles. The psychological dimension of these battles cannot be overstated. For the Japanese, every tank represented not just an enemy machine, but an existential threat to their honor, their comrades, and their culture. Soldiers wrote in diaries, "We could see the flames from the tank even before it appeared. Every step we took was toward death, yet we ran. To hesitate was shame. To survive dishonor. And still, we ran." The fear of dishonor outweighed the fear of fire. Entire platoons willingly positioned themselves in paths where Zippo tanks would advance, knowing that survival was unlikely. Visuals: archival close-ups of soldiers' determined faces, hands clutching grenades, flamethrower fire reflecting in the eyes of defenders. In addition to individual acts of heroism and sacrifice, Japanese units employed coordinated tactics to maximize their impact against these mechanized beasts. Soldiers dug concealed tunnels beneath anticipated tank paths, planting mines and explosives designed to immobilize or destroy vehicles. In some cases, multiple soldiers synchronized their charges to strike simultaneously, increasing the odds of halting an advance. Even when these tactics failed, the sheer audacity and timing of the assaults forced tank crews to react defensively, slowing progress and creating opportunities for other infantry units to mount attacks. Insert B-roll. Animated diagrams of mine placements, soldiers synchronizing detonations, jungle terrain from above. Yet for all their ingenuity, the encounters were devastatingly one-sided in terms of casualties. Reports from both sides document staggering human losses. Entire squads of Japanese soldiers annihilated in seconds by flamethrower blasts, charred earth and mangled bodies littering the battlefield. The Americans, while often unscathed due to armored protection, were not immune to the psychological shock of facing men willing to sacrifice everything in close-range attacks. Tank operators later recounted horror and awe, describing Japanese soldiers as ghosts of honor, running into flames with a resolve that defied human comprehension. Visuals, slow motion of explosions, smoke curling into the sky, silhouettes of soldiers in firelit jungles. As battles raged across Okinawa, Iwo Jima, and other Pacific islands, the human and mechanical struggle reached staggering extremes. One account describes a soldier leaping from a foxhole, clutching a satchel charge and detonating it beneath a Zippo tank while simultaneously calling out for his comrades to attack. The explosion destroyed part of the vehicle and the soldier, leaving nothing but scorched earth and a lingering testament to unyielding resolve. These encounters, repeated hundreds of times across the Pacific, illustrated the deadly calculus of ideology versus technology, men willing to die against machines built to incinerate them. Insert B-roll, archival letters from soldiers, maps of ambush points, flamethrower tanks advancing through destroyed terrain. Yet in this chaos, moments of tragic humanity emerged. Survivors recounted acts of mercy, hesitation, and fear, reminding us that these were not mindless drones, but human beings conditioned by culture and ideology. In one remarkable account, a Japanese soldier, trapped in a bunker as a Zippo approached, hesitated at the last second and was instantly incinerated, leaving a profound imprint on the memories of his fellow soldiers. The line between courage and futility was razor-thin, yet it was lived and relived in every engagement. The Zippo tank battles of the Pacific illustrate the intersection of human psychology, ideology, and mechanized warfare. Soldiers were willing to throw themselves into flames not merely out of desperation, but because they were trained, indoctrinated, and conditioned to act with unwavering loyalty. Just when it seemed that the Zippo tanks would sweep through every defensive position with unstoppable force, the battlefield revealed a shocking truth. The human element, ingenuity, and sheer audacity could defy even the most terrifying war machine. In multiple engagements, small groups of Japanese soldiers achieved what appeared impossible, slowing, damaging, or even temporarily disabling these flamethrower tanks. These unexpected successes stunned American crews and changed the dynamic of the battle, proving that determination and sacrifice could sometimes overcome technology. Visuals, archival footage of damaged tanks, Japanese soldiers moving through smoke, mud-soaked, and determined. One infamous example occurred on a narrow jungle pass on Okinawa. A small platoon, just 15 men, had prepared an elaborate trap. Using bamboo spikes, concealed mines, and carefully timed satchel charges, they lured 2 Zippo tanks into a kill zone. The first charge detonated beneath the lead tank, causing flames to surge and forcing it to halt. The second tank, caught off guard, became trapped in mud while soldiers hurled explosives at close range. Against all odds, the tanks were stalled for several tense minutes, enough time for infantry to regroup and create a temporary defensive perimeter. Insert B-roll, slow-motion explosions under tanks, smoke rising from jungle paths, soldiers charging from cover. These moments of success, however, came at a horrifying cost. The soldiers had to expose themselves directly to the tank's flames, ensuring near-certain death for many. Yet their willingness to die was rooted not in recklessness, but in the ideological and cultural imperatives that demanded absolute loyalty and honor. Diaries from survivors recount the terror, the calculation, and the moment-to-moment decisions. We knew our lives were counted in seconds, but hesitation was dishonor. So we ran forward. Some survived, most did not. But we delayed the enemy, and that was our duty. Visuals, close-ups of soldiers' faces, mud and blood-streaked, hands gripping explosives, flames reflecting in eyes. In some cases, the twist was even more dramatic. On the island of Iwo Jima, a group of soldiers used decoy trenches and dummy explosives to lure Zippo tanks into killing zones. When the tanks advanced, hidden charges detonated, damaging engines and immobilizing tracks. American crews scrambled to react, while Japanese soldiers seized the opportunity to strike from concealed positions. These encounters revealed the remarkable tactical ingenuity of troops often dismissed in Western accounts as fanatical or irrational. Visuals: animated battlefield maps showing decoy trenches, archival footage of tank tracks and detonations. Yet the battlefield was merciless. Even small victories often resulted in staggering human losses. Entire squads would be wiped out, sometimes only moments after a successful ambush. The contrast between tactical success and personal sacrifice became a recurring theme in the Pacific campaigns. Soldiers were lauded in their diaries and letters for acts that delayed tanks, destroyed equipment, or inflicted casualties, but these victories were almost always purchased at the cost of life. Insert B-roll, archival letters, burned-out trenches, mangled bodies in mud, smoke rising from jungle fires. The psychological impact on American forces was equally profound. Zippo crews, trained to rely on mechanical superiority, faced an enemy willing to challenge death directly. Commanders described the surreal scenes, men charging from smoke and mud, igniting explosives beneath the tanks, and vanishing into the jungle before they could be targeted. The unpredictability of these attacks forced American units to adapt tactics, coordinate more carefully, and respect the tenacity of the defenders. The human factor had turned what seemed like a technological guarantee into a chaotic and dangerous engagement. Visuals: tank crews coordinating under fire, flamethrowers firing into thick jungle, soldiers signaling movements. The unexpected turn often came from the ingenuity of Japanese soldiers using the environment itself as a weapon. Muddy slopes, dense foliage, and natural choke points were leveraged to hinder tank movement. Soldiers would trigger explosives remotely, dig pitfalls, or employ makeshift barricades. Zippo tanks, despite their firepower, could be slowed, trapped, or even damaged by resourceful troops. These battlefield innovations demonstrated that survival against technology was sometimes achieved through brains as much as bravery. Insert B-roll, close-ups of hidden mines, soldiers camouflaged in foliage, tanks stuck in mud or blocked paths. Yet with these successes came unintended consequences. Many soldiers perished in their own traps or miscalculated charges, leading to catastrophic detonations. Entire ambushes collapsed under the weight of human error, and the line between heroism and tragedy blurred. For every tank stalled, there were stories of soldiers incinerated moments later, leaving a haunting legacy of sacrifice intertwined with fleeting tactical victories. Visuals: flames consuming jungle positions, mangled trenches, survivors crawling through mud. Another unexpected consequence was the impact on morale, both American and Japanese. For the Americans, the audacity and persistence of Japanese attacks created fear, uncertainty, and awe. For the Japanese, small victories, even at the cost of life, reinforced the cultural narrative of honor and duty. These moments became legendary, inspiring other soldiers to emulate the same fearless, suicidal tactics. What might have seemed hopeless or futile became a self-reinforcing cycle of courage and deadly determination. Insert B-roll, archival footage of Japanese soldiers celebrating brief victories, American forces regrouping, panoramic shots of burnt terrain. In some instances, the twists were almost cinematic in scale. Entire tanks were temporarily immobilized, supplies disrupted, and advances delayed, all due to the audacity of small squads. Commanders later acknowledged that the human factor, unpredictable, ideologically driven, and willing to die, posed challenges that technology alone could not solve. It was here, in these unpredictable, bloody, and desperate encounters, that the story of human will versus mechanical force reached its peak. Visuals: tanks caught in mud, close-range assaults with explosives, flames illuminating the jungle canopy. In the broader context, these events underscore a paradox of the Pacific War. Human bravery and ideology could defy technological supremacy, even if only temporarily. Zippo tanks were terrifying and effective, yet the defenders' willingness to embrace death for honor, their ingenuity in using terrain, and their psychological commitment created moments where machines were forced to yield to human resolve. Every successful ambush, every stalled tank, and every sacrifice reshaped the battlefield in unexpected ways. Insert B-roll, slow pan of burned-out jungle, close-ups of abandoned weapons, smoke rising in golden light. The reader or viewer is left with a dramatic realization. The war was not solely decided by firepower or engineering, it was also shaped by the human spirit, culture, and the extreme choices men were willing to make. These unexpected turns, temporary victories, devastating losses, as the smoke cleared and the echoes of explosions faded, the brutal reality of the Pacific War revealed itself in stark, haunting clarity. The battles fought against American Zippo tanks were not merely tactical confrontations. They were a clash of human will against unstoppable machines, a confrontation where ideology, honor, and desperation collided with raw technological power. By the final weeks of the conflict, it was clear that these suicidal tactics, while occasionally effective, came at an unimaginable cost. Entire units were wiped out, villages destroyed, and the jungles littered with the remnants of courage and fire. Insert B-roll, destroyed bunkers, scorched jungle canopies, charred debris, abandoned weapons. Yet the story does not end with loss alone. The defenders' extraordinary resolve left a psychological imprint on the American soldiers who survived. Accounts from tank operators and infantry alike reveal a mix of horror and admiration. Men who faced relentless, ideologically driven assaults could not help but respect the unyielding bravery and ingenuity of their opponents. Even as the Americans advanced, taking ground and neutralizing defenses, the stories of Japanese soldiers willing to throw themselves into flames for honor endured, shaping how future generations would understand courage in warfare. Visuals. Archival footage of American soldiers pausing in the jungle, observing destroyed enemy positions, writing in journals. One of the most chilling legacies of these battles was the scale of sacrifice. Soldiers died not in confusion, but deliberately, choosing to confront death with open eyes. Entire platoons disappeared in seconds, their lives consumed by fire and steel, leaving only scorched earth and echoes of heroism. Yet in these acts lay a paradox. While the Americans could destroy fortifications with Zippo tanks, the human spirit proved resilient, unpredictable, and almost impossible to extinguish entirely. Insert B-roll, slow motion of flames licking at jungle canopies, mangled foxholes, abandoned personal items. The consequences extended far beyond the battlefield. For the Japanese, each act of sacrifice became a symbol of cultural and national identity. Stories of soldiers charging Zippo tanks were circulated among comrades and surviving units, reinforcing the belief that honor required absolute obedience and unwavering courage, even against insurmountable odds. These narratives would later influence post-war literature, memoirs, and historical analysis, providing insight into the mindset that led men to willingly throw their lives away. Visuals. Archival letters, portraits of young soldiers, animated maps showing defensive positions and tank routes. For the Americans, the encounters fostered a combination of tactical adaptation and psychological awareness. Tank commanders learned to anticipate close-range attacks, infantry units coordinated more closely with armor, and the military culture adjusted to respect the tenacity of an opponent often dismissed as fanatical. These lessons, born of tragedy and extraordinary bravery, became part of military doctrine and historical understanding, demonstrating the complex interplay between human courage and mechanized warfare. Insert B-roll. American tanks advancing cautiously, infantry signaling, smoke rising from destroyed bunkers. Yet the human cost remained staggering. The twist of ideology-driven sacrifice meant that victory came with the knowledge of lives lost unnecessarily, yet gloriously, in the pursuit of honor. Diaries and oral histories from Japanese veterans, recorded decades later, recount both pride and sorrow. Pride in courage, sorrow for friends lost, and reflection on the impossible expectations imposed by culture and command. It is a reminder that war is rarely black and white, and heroism often exists alongside tragedy. Visuals, slow pan of gravestones, memorials, and jungle landscapes where battles occurred. The final turn in this story lies in the legacy of these actions. Zippo tank assaults became a defining symbol of the Pacific War, a testament to the extremities of human psychology and the deadly efficiency of mechanized warfare. Military historians still study these encounters to understand how small units of soldiers, armed with courage, ingenuity, and explosives, could challenge technology designed to overwhelm them. They are cautionary tales, instructive for strategy, and haunting reminders of the human dimension in war. Insert B-roll, archival analysis diagrams, animated sequences of tank versus infantry maneuvers, veteran interviews. But perhaps the most poignant aspect of this story is the emotional resonance. Beyond strategy, numbers, and equipment lies the human heart, the fear, devotion, loyalty, and desperation that drove men to leap into flames. Their actions provoke questions that linger long after the smoke has cleared. Was it heroism or madness? Duty or indoctrination? Triumph or futility? These questions have no easy answers, but they shape the narrative of the Pacific War and the memory of those who faced Zippo tanks head-on. Visuals, reflective close-ups of veterans, archival portraits of soldiers, slow-motion jungle sunset. In the modern day, the jungles where Zippo tanks once advanced are quiet. Trees grow where men fell. Trails fade into memory. Yet the stories endure, told in documentaries, books, and historical analysis. They remind us that the intersection of human ideology, bravery, and technological warfare is one of history's most compelling, terrifying, and unforgettable lessons. Insert B-roll, current aerial shots of former battlefields, memorials, silent jungles, nature reclaiming ruins. As this story concludes, one truth emerges with clarity: war is more than machines and strategy. It is about human beings, their choices, their fears, and their devotion to ideals that can lead to unimaginable acts. Japanese soldiers who threw themselves against Zippo tanks exemplify this truth. They are remembered not only for their deaths, but for the sheer extremity of their commitment. Their lives illuminate the psychological, cultural, and moral complexities of combat in ways numbers alone cannot capture. The final lesson is both sobering and unforgettable. Even in the face of unstoppable machinery, human courage, fueled by belief, ideology, or desperation, can create moments of triumph, horror, and profound legacy. These moments leave viewers contemplating the limits of human endurance, the cost of honor, and the dramatic reality of a war fought not only with weapons, but with the human spirit itself. Final visuals, panoramic sunset, ruins of trenches, empty jungle paths, lingering smoke. But the story of the Pacific War and the extraordinary courage of those who faced Zippo tanks remains alive in history, memory, and the lessons that continue to shape how we understand warfare, human psychology, and the devastating power of ideology.